Now, at the center of all this was a man who very rarely gets any kind of spotlight or attention, and this is Dr. Joseph Warren. Now, I hadn't even really heard of Dr. Joseph Warren, maybe in passing here and there, but when I really started looking into him, I was like, dang, he was kind of badass. So, Warren, he was actually a physician by trade, i.e., doctor, but by 1775, he was the quiet nerve center of Boston's resistance. He gathered intelligence, he tracked British movements, he coordinated responses with remarkable discipline, and it was Warren that learned of General Gage's plan to march on Concord. It was Dr. Joseph Warren who actually did dispatch Revere and another writer by the name of William Dawes. You might have heard of William Dawes, but he went on a different route. So to maximize the chance that at least one of them would succeed, they rode off in different directions and had different responsibilities of telling different people just in case one or both of them were intercepted at a certain point. Now, Warren understood something very, very crucial, and that's that information loses value the longer it's delayed. So his goal wasn't necessarily the drama, it was speed and it was certainty, it was precision. And Warren paid for his commitment. Just 2 months later, at the Battle of Bunker Hill, he actually refused a command role and he fought as a volunteer. He did end up falling during the final assault, and when the British identified his body, they actually mutilated it, which was a brutal signal of how dangerous they believed him to be. He was kind of a badass. Like, he was a badass, you guys. Now, this was not an accident of history. It was full on recognition. The midnight warning worked because it wasn't heroic. It was actually very professional. It was well planned. It relied on prearranged signals, trusted couriers, multiple routes, local knowledge, and leadership that understood intelligence is a collective effort. Paul Revere, he obviously mattered deeply. So did William Dawes. So did the men who hung the lanterns, saddled the horses, opened the doors in the dead of night. They were all on the same page and they all knew what was going on. But the real achievement wasn't the ride. This was a resistance network mature enough to turn British secrecy against itself. Now, when the first shots fired the next morning, the colonies were not caught off guard. They were already awake. They were up and running. That, more than any poem or painting, is what made April 19th, 1775, the beginning of a revolution. In intelligence work, timing is everything. It is not a detail, it is everything. So on the night of April 18th, 1775, the British objective was precise. General Thomas Gage did not order a broad crackdown, he ordered a very surgical strike. Now, British regulars were to march quietly to Concord, seize hidden military supplies, and arrest rebel leaders if they could not be found. That was the mission. The goal was speed and surprise. No speeches, no warnings, in the rebellion before it could actually start. If the colonists were caught sleeping, the resistance would fracture, but secrecy cut both ways. Everybody had a dog in that fight. The Sons of Liberty had eyes literally everywhere. Word reached Joseph Warren that the troops were moving, not days ahead, but hours. He had just a little bit of time. That narrow window mattered very much. A warning sent a little bit too early could raise suspicion, but a warning sent a little bit too late would be entirely useless. So Revere and the network had to move in the space between certainty and silence. Now, Paul Revere's path that night was not just some romantic wandering around effort to try to tell as many people as possible. It was designed, and it was designed very carefully. Once ferried across the Charles River, he rode through Charlestown, he went through Medford, and then, I'm going to say this wrong, Minatomi, basically just towns that were thick with militia readiness. And these were not random villages, these were nodes. Each stop was chosen because someone trusted lived there, someone who knew the next rider, someone who could wake others without raising alarm. And Revere did not run through the streets shouting. He knocked, he whispered, he confirmed, and sent that person on to do their duty. So at each critical point, the warning fractured outward. Again, multi-level marketing. They told one person and that person told the next person. The message was carried by fresh riders who knew their roads the best. Now, this wasn't necessarily a relay race with a single baton. It was more like a branching tree. And that mattered because Revere never actually reached Concord. He was captured near Lincoln by a British patrol. He was questioned at gunpoint and he was briefly held. By the time they released him, his mission was already out into the world. It was underway. It was technically complete. Now, at dawn, the church bells were ringing, but this was not in the name of worship. This was a warning. Drums sounded, militia captains issued their orders, farmers reached for their muskets that had been cleaned and hidden away, tucked behind a bed frame for months, and these men were not improvising. This was not a shock to anybody in the colonies. They had drilled for this moment, they had agreed on rendezvous points, they knew who was responsible for what task. So when British troops arrived at Lexington Green at sunrise, they did not find sleeping villages, they found a line of armed men. Now, the first shots, whoever fired those, we still don't know, we will never know. Those shots shattered the illusion of control. And as the British pushed on towards Concord, they discovered that most of the stored ammunition had already been moved or hidden or was being used. Now, this mission, the British mission, technically had failed. And as the British began to march back to Boston, the alarm system reached its final phase. Minutemen poured in from surrounding towns, firing from behind trees, stone walls, and hills. What had begun as a disciplined march became a running battle.